Hello, everyone. Welcome to Uranus, Spiritual Awakening, and a New Activism. This talk was originally given at the Shaping a New Paradigm online summit in 2020 with the New Paradigm Astrology community. This is one of the talks that I'm actually taking off of an old platform and making available for free here on YouTube. Please check out my website for many more classes and courses and training programs for those that want to deepen your study and work more deeply with me. This talk, I remember it being very interesting. I covered a lot of ground. The essence of this talk is really about understanding the nature of awakening, the nature of creation from the point of view of Uranus, and how that relates to what we call activism. I speak a lot about archetype of Uranus and resonance and harmony and the intelligence of creation, give a lot of cool examples and teachings to illustrate the universal archetypes that are pointed to in Uranus. And I address mostly a cross study between Gandhi and Ramana Maharshi, two very important, impactful Indian characters, both teachers in their own right, and both relate to the Uranian archetype, but seemingly in two different ways. Ramana Maharshi spent pretty much most of his life up on a mountain, engrossed in his own awakening, in the unification of the oneself. And Gandhi spent most of his life focused on activism. And of course, his activism was very much founded in doing his own inner work, working on himself, but still very much in the world, where we can say Ramana Maharshi was more outside of the world. Two very different ways of being, both have had a very profound impact on the consciousness of this planet. So it's a very interesting talk. Actually, Gandhi and Ramana Maharshi never met, but they were contemporaries of each other. And I actually speak a little bit to a time where they almost met each other. Gandhi wanted to meet Ramana Maharshi, but he got so close and it didn't happen. So it's a very interesting talk. I hope you will enjoy. Once again, check out my website in the description below for more classes and opportunities to train with me. Enjoy. My talk tonight, or this morning, for those of you who are awake, is on Uranus and spiritual awakening and a new activism. And the core premise of what I'm going to speak about today is this idea that at the core, our projections upon reality, how we look at the world, is far more foundational, far more significant than how we are responding or reacting or choosing to engage with it. And that the former really is a satellite to the latter. And our story of reality, what we comprehend and apprehend about our existence and our place in it, says what we perceive in terms of what needs to change, what needs to be innovated, what absolutely shouldn't be, what needs to evolve. And we'll look at some chart examples and really examine this archetype, because Uranus at the core does correspond to liberation. It corresponds to freedom. We could have freedom that manifests within a particular community or condition where we are liberating from a state of oppression, a state of limitation. We could also have freedom that's in the mind, that is free from context, an essential freedom that is true to who we are as we are created to be, that doesn't come or go. So we'll be exploring all these different facets to Uranus today. I'll be fielding your questions, and if you want to ask me a question, the best way for me to catch you is by typing it in the Q&A box. So I'll just be kind of glimpsing there every once in a while. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if the sharing is happening yet. I don't think the sharing is happening yet, is it? Okay. Now it is. So the topics that we'll address today are first really speaking to the unconditioned mind. We'll examine why does Uranus have any correlation with the idea of shocks and surprises, spirals, waves, and energy, friendly neighborhood. We'll be examining Ramana Maharshi and Gandhi, and some other things. So here's a quote from Adyashanti. Awakening is a shift from conditioned mind to unconditioned consciousness. And just let's unpack that statement first, and we'll see where that takes us. The first thing that I want to say is, while this talk is on Uranus, I can be completely honest and say I have no clue what I'm about to say and where this is going to go. And we have, in our day-to-day experience, this interplay between what's conditioned and what's unconditioned. What's conditioned simply is everything that is defined. So this mug is conditioned. This body is a particular conditioning. My posture has been conditioned. And all of our minds are conditioned. Consciousness, which is inherently, consciousness is Neptune, Pisces, unformed, infinite, formless, timeless. It becomes conditioned. And the individuating aspect of consciousness manifesting as each of us, we have these individual ego structures with these individual memories and these specific ways of looking out into the world. And so when I look at this computer, when I look at this microphone, I'm seeing a thing, right? There's so much conditioning. There are so many concepts and ideas and constructs that are already there. It's like looking at a person and knowing who they are, right? You're talking to them and you already know how they're going to react to you, how they're going to respond to you. Why? Because you've talked to them 30,000 times already and you know they're predictable. In the same way, you wake up and you will just kind of know what your life is going to be like because you've been living that life for a while and things aren't really going to change much. That's how the conditioned mind thinks, however. The truth is, this person that you're talking to, you have no clue who they are. And Byron Katie actually has a wonderful quote that I just love. She said, "No two people have ever met." And the idea behind that statement is when we are meeting another person, we're pretty much interfacing with our thoughts about that person. And when we meet our own life, we're pretty much interfacing with our conditioned thoughts about our life. And this is why change in general is a very slow process. This is why we know people that win the lottery, but then they quickly, after several years, spend it all and they revert to the same mindset, the same reality. And that's Saturn. Saturn is all things that are conditioned. It's the thermostat. It's our default setting. And, when you do the Saturn work, you're really becoming self-aware of our conditioning, becoming reflective of our patterns. We unravel it. We create new patterns. My talk on Friday will be all about that. But when we're looking at Uranus, there's no unraveling. There's no becoming self-reflective. We're not creating new conditions. We're not developing better structures. We're not developing relationship skills. We're not developing money skills. We're not improving our body. Uranus points to something else entirely, and that is the unconditioned mind. It is meeting with this person and just observing everything that you think without grabbing it, without needing to value it. Jeffrey Wolf Green has often said that 80% of our perceptions in the current life are based upon subconscious memories in the individuated unconscious, which is a Jungian term symbolizing sort of the total soul field of memory that we have, in this case, not even from this personal life, but from all past lives. That we see what is in our field of subconscious memory that we're not even processing or aware of. But to sort of just stand in the seat of observer, to be unattached, unpossessive of the thoughts that run through our mind, and to be open to the newness of this present moment, to be open to what is this? Who is this? What is this? What am I? What happens in that posture is it creates the space. I'm going to probably sneeze a couple times. I have allergies. And I feel one coming on right now. Tell him. It creates the space for what is to become self-revealed. And it's not even realized. Realize is a Sagittarius word. Realize is like having an insight. Like, I realize something. We're grasping more of reality. Whereas Uranus isn't even a thing we realize. We don't see more of the truth with Uranus. It's just what is. And actually, the isness of reality has nothing to do with our comprehension of it. This is why you can have a dream with a bunch of number symbols and sequences and animals and symbols. And these are archetypes. These archetypes reflect these universal, impersonal aspects of reality. That's what astrology is about. And all of our charts are composed of all of the signs, all of the houses, all of the planets and asteroids and everything. And they're all archetypal dynamics manifesting within consciousness. We have this personal sense of self, right? Ego construct that internalizes everything according to a personal context, makes it personal. But of course, personal doesn't exist other than in our own minds. Doesn't mean it's not relevant. Doesn't mean personal and personal safety and personal context doesn't have a place, because obviously it does. But it doesn't define the totality of what we are. So Uranus points to the unconditioned nature of reality, which basically says life is what it is as it is created to be, prior to, separate from, completely beyond our thoughts and concepts about it. Which means everything in creation is exactly what it is. And I like to think of Uranus in a way that's very similar to looking at the stars in a solar system. You look at the solar system and you can see that all the planets, everything is placed exactly where it is. It's like one giant ecosystem, one community, like all the species in a forest. That in a way that the human mind in its conditioned state couldn't possibly make up or comprehend or grasp the entirety of. Every ecosystem is a beautifully complex web of interrelationship and support. And the entire universe is one single ecosystem. And I want us to really contemplate the meaning of that for a moment. All of creation, all of reality is one ecosystem. And there's a certain intuitiveness to that principle, to that idea. There aren't separate realities. There aren't separate divisions of universes. And then, God created everything, but then there's this other thing that wasn't created that's also here. Either it's one community or untruth is real, right? Either this is all one unit of reality, no different than any microcosmic perception of that, right? No different than the ecosystem in a forest, no different than the total unification and harmonization of all the organs and tissues and skeletal structures and skin and blood in the body. We have that principle with Uranus that the micro and the macro reflect the same thing. As Kai Pacho was saying earlier today, that it's not a matter of, let's get the sneeze. Ah! Woo! It's not a matter of as above, therefore so below. It's as above, so below. They're one. Simultaneous. And that's why I always like to say that astrology isn't causative of reality. The stars aren't making us do anything. They're simultaneous to reality.
And so when we look at the unconditioned nature of reality, it's almost like saying we're looking at the mind of God. We can define Uranus as the projection of creative intelligence from the source of creation. We can creatively say that 12 archetypes are the 12 thoughts of God. And that these archetypes manifest at every size scale, every dimension, every scale of reality. Right? Wherever you look, you're seeing a thought. Wherever you look, you're seeing an essential archetype of reality that is one with everything everywhere. It exists on every dimension. Now, when you start to understand that, you begin to appreciate that our projections, our conditioned thoughts about the world, about one another, aren't necessarily true. In fact, they tend to be somewhat metaphorical. And we'll touch upon this idea of metaphor a little bit in a moment. But as we apprehend this isness, the intelligence of creation as it is, we begin to develop a perception of reality that is beyond time, right? Saturn, boundaries, time. Uranus is beyond time. That's hard for us to comprehend. It's very hard for us to imagine, what does it mean to conceive of reality beyond time? Well, we have to appreciate that we're constantly thinking of things in terms of past and future. I'll come back to this share in a moment, but I'll explain this really important idea. Everything we look at, everything that we interface with in reality implies, there we go. Am I on speaker view right now? I'm seeing Daniela as a speaker view. It should be me that's the speaker right now. Okay, good. Implies that our mind is holding some construct of past or future. And just try it. Look at anything in the room right now. It's impossible to look at it without bringing in the past or the future. Think of a person that you know. It's absolutely impossible to think of that person without past or future. By the way, someone let me know if my voice is too low. I'm hearing that I should speak louder. So let me know if it's too low. And so to conceive of reality, okay, good, beyond time means present moment. It means just this moment, which brings our mind to a state where it's not grabbing onto some story. And I want to offer this perspective that this present moment is foundational reality, and time, and all the cycles of time, all the yugas, the thousands and millions of year cycles within cycles, they're all observed and seen. Like I can look at my eucalyptus nasal inhaler. They're all held clearly and objectively within the eye of present moment consciousness. Time itself and the seeming immensity of time is used. It's observed. Consciousness doesn't exist in it. The best analogy that we can use to that would be standing on top of a mountain and looking at everything. Of course, it's an analogy. And so there's a limitation in that analogy because I'm using the form of a mountain and looking upon things. But when we're looking at Uranus, we are standing apart. From all things form, time, and space. Thus, the more we develop this objective perception, the more we grasp the inherent impersonalness, the utter impersonalness of everything within creation. And we develop a greater and more objective ability to see what is, and thus what the impulse of creation is, what its nature is, what its quality is like. And to understand, and this is one of the things that astrology teaches us, The I Ching also teaches this to us, that what's happening right now might be the same archetypal essence of a past cycle and of a future cycle. We can begin to look at our present moment reality right now and understand that there is a unification and a continuity to time that is not linear and sequential in the ways that we usually think of it. This is why, as we wake up, it's a very common symptom to begin to have flashes of the past. And as my partner Michelle often says, remembering the future in the moment. It's like deja vu turned forward, but it's no different than deja vu turned backwards. Remembering the future is no different than remembering the past. Because from the point of view of present sovereign consciousness, we can look upon all of it. And this, again, is just like pushing against our conditioned thinking that says, wait a minute, the future already happened? Well, not happened, it's now, right? Happened is sort of the incorrect way to think of it. All ways that we talk about this are going to be kind of incorrect. So to get out of our Saturn-based thinking is really, really important here. I'm going to present a couple notions here that relate to this. A minute ago, you saw a picture of a toilet bowl. And I just appreciate noticing how water swirls and how everything in creation swirls. We have the sacred geometry, sort of representing the mathematics, the inherent design and the intelligence of creation. These are all scientific observations that are, basically noticed from a consciousness from those that have noticed these underlying unified patterns. Moving our bodies in these spirals and these waves as well. It connects us, this is Qigong, to the universal field of energy. The more we learn about energy and how energy moves and flows, the more we understand that it's actually more about spirals and waves. This is my daughter's head. And when she was born, I caught her, she spiraled out of the womb. This is Sri Yukteswar. He wrote a book called Holy Science. Many people don't know this. He's actually the founder of evolutionary astrology because Jeffrey Wolf Green received the initial Pluto information transmitted intuitively in a dream through Sri Yukteswar. It was all in Sanskrit. And I think it was a series of dreams, and this sort of became the starting point for his direct experience and realization of this path with evolutionary astrology. But this was brought forth from Sri Yukteswar, who during his lifetime was also known as a galactic astrologer, a very great astrologer. He was the teacher of Yogananda, if you're familiar. So he talks about the yugas. The yugas are this construct that actually manifests in many cultures. We have, the Greek and the Roman constructs of the ages, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Silver Age. Many different cultures had these constructs. And the basic idea is that consciousness on the planet goes through these very large cycles, 24,000 year cycles, where at the apex of the cycle, consciousness is most illuminated and knowledge of self and creation is complete. And at the end, at the very bottom of the cycle, known as the Dark Age, that construct of separation is the strongest. Here's a little chart that just depicts that. So this is according to the Indian cosmology, the Hindu cosmology. And this is Sri Yukteswar's counting. There are different accounts for the timing of the yugas, but more or less, everyone pretty much agrees that we're somewhere in the beginning of a Dwapara Yuga. The Hare Krishna religion, Vaishnavites, I think they still believe we're in the Kali Yuga, or maybe at the end of Kali Yuga. So according to him, we're, a couple hundred years or so into the Dwapara Yuga, which is the Bronze Age. And that's just after the Dark Age. So the apex of the Dark Age in this map was around 500 CE. Anyone remember how horrible that time was? The Dark Ages are a great way to describe what they were. It was just one of the worst times in human history as far as I'm aware. And the sense of living in fear, guilt, shame, persecution, suffering, sickness, disease, oppression, it was almost just like difficult to live anywhere in the world for several hundred years. And around the time of the Renaissance, we have the technological revolution, industrial revolution. Gradually, we've been moving more into a state where the arc of consciousness on this planet becomes more aware of principles of inclusivity, forms of health and well-being, moving further from castes and hierarchies that are oppressive to different populations of people or different genders or different sects of life, gradually appreciating our relationship with nature. By the way, notice that this cosmology, you can see these astrological ages, what's known as the precession of the equinox actually corresponds to these yugas, to these ages. This is in the Hindu cosmology, they actually work with the autumnal equinox, whereas in the West, we use generally the spring equinox. So we think of it as we're leaving Pisces, moving into Aquarius. For them, it's the opposite. Leaving Virgo, moving into Leo. That's why you have over here the lion and over here the virgin, right? And we're somewhere around here between virgin and lion. So I want to bring out an important point here. And I'm going to do this by just describing how Sri Yukteswar speaks about the Dwapara Yuga. And you'll see why I'm talking about this in a moment. Dharma, the mental virtue, is then in the second stage of development and is but half complete. The human intellect can then comprehend the fine matters of electricities and their attributes, which are the creating principles of the external world. Here's what I want to offer to everyone. At every age, there's a certain cosmology. And this cosmology isn't necessarily the religion or the culture, but there's a collective ethos, a collective mythology, so to speak, that describes our overall worldview. And everyone born in the era will be a part of that. That's going to be the nature of consensus reality. So the age of Pisces, which is, the whole dark ages, finishing up the Kali Yuga, had its own construct. And spirituality in that era had to be really protected, right? Because life was really hard. There's a lot of oppression. There's a lot of fear, a lot of sickness. And so if you wanted to practice spirituality, you had to separate yourself from the world, from desires, from family, all these things that are antithetical to spirit, antithetical to truth, right? But as our worldview shifts, we find that our notion of everything changes as well. And I'll be speaking a lot more about this on Friday on the Saturn Talk, speaking about reshaping love and sexuality in the new paradigm. But we have to understand and appreciate that our thermostat collectively is defined by the astrological age that we're in. And that's a Saturn dimension. But every era, no matter what era it is, there are going to be souls that wake up from it. And that awakening from it is that Uranian awakening where, right, you step away from these cycles. You remove yourself from these thousands upon thousands of years of cycles within cycles within cycles, spirals, the intelligent design of creation, and you stand in the seat of the observer, of the unconditioned mind. And such souls, like Sri Yukteswar to a significant degree, have the ability to perceive these larger cycles, these larger unfoldings. And when we begin to see life beyond identification with the current era, with the current ethos, cultural collective thermostat that is ingrained in the collective for several hundred years at a time with its own slow developmental arc. We free ourselves from this Uranian shadow, which is the need to fit in. Uranus corresponds to the idea of belonging. Why? Because Uranus is belonging. Everything belongs. No one's kicked out. You know, one of the traumas of the Uranus signature is you can have this when you were a child, that maybe you were the cool kid and you know, everyone liked you, or maybe you were the dork. Maybe you were the one who was bullied. Maybe you were never picked on the sports team. Maybe everyone wanted to go to your birthday party. We have these constructs of in and out, a part of the club, not a part of the club. You're the untouchables in India. You're part of this caste or this skin color or this culture. All these conditioned concepts that basically create a hierarchy of superiority and inferiority. But the actual nature of Uranus is not that we're all the same, right? Not that we all get the same things and the same experiences, because every individual soul is uniquely what it is. And by the way, the individuality of each soul is a Uranian thing. Individuality being different than personality. Personality is self-construct. My personality, it changes. I can develop my personality, work on my personality. You can like my personality, not like my personality. But individuality is an essential aspect of creation. Everything has its own individuality. And the soul, each soul is timeless, and its individuality is essential to creation. And it fits into the rest of reality. Everyone has a place here. I really can't stress the importance of understanding that principle with Uranus. Because to understand that everything and everyone belongs means that there's always a higher vantage point. There's always a higher perspective that does not result in exclusion, conflict, and division. So coming back to this notion of consciousness separating itself from identification with the time, with the cycles, with the forms, and not needing to be a part of the cultural trends, the way everyone does things. Everyone's on Facebook. Everyone is on Zoom. Everyone wears clothing this way. We form community based upon like interests. And so there's always this threat. If I'm going to follow my individuality and not just try to belong, will I have any friends? Will I become a social outcast? Will I belong anywhere? And yet, there's something profoundly liberating within Uranus. As we follow our own true nature, we resonate with community. We resonate with individualities that naturally come together on their own. So just as Uranus corresponds to the inherent belongingness of everything within creation, Uranus then also corresponds to how we create belonging based upon ways that we resonate with each other. But those ways that we resonate with each other are going to keep on changing. Now, I say this because we're looking at, let's say, this day and age. We're using technology. You know, earlier, Rick Levine talked about Marshall McLuhan, and everything is sort of the evolved content of something else. Right? The computer isn't really a new invention. It's just the innovation of an existing construct, the typewriter. And the typewriter itself, if you keep on tracing it back, it's just an expression of the archetype of communication. It's not a new construct. It's not a new idea within creation. What just happened here? And so at this day and age, we have the internet, we have technology, we have phones. And we can say, great, now we're more connected. We're more in the Aquarian age. This represents a greater mindset of inclusivity. And a lot of people try to talk about, like, what's the future of the internet, right? How are we going to be communicating with each other in 50 years, in 100 years? And I'm going to share a really wonderful quote from a very wise man. He said it today in the morning, at least in the United States. This was Rick Levine said this in his talk this morning. And I want to focus on the last bullet point. What's next? One point he was making is you can't know, right? This was about the future of astrology. You can't know what the future of astrology is going to, there's no way to know. Just like no one could have predicted the internet and how it's manifesting in iPhones. And the thing that we all do is we take metaphor and we make it literal. Because every innovation, every creation, everything is just drawing upon the essential individuality of life, and it's making it accessible in the way that the conditioned mind knows how to relate to it. So, for example, in our cultural thermostat, we have capitalism, we have consumerism, we have personal gain, which means we also have the notion of personal loss. We have possessiveness. We have this cultural construct of I'm going to use the resources of the earth to better myself, to gain. If I'm going to survive, I need to figure out how to use the resources for my gain. That's the cultural thermostat. Now, with compassion, we're all doing that. We all have computers. We're doing this. So this is not about, dropping technology altogether. It's really just bringing awareness and hopefully offering a higher perspective on all these dynamics. We tend to think about the future of something from the limitations of how our own consciousness is conditioned at the time. And what I want to offer here is the internet's a metaphor, the iPhones are a metaphor, Zoom is a metaphor. And the more we evolve within the ways that our mind is able to receive, meaning it's not too shocking and inaccessible to our conditioned mind, right? Someone had to think of the iPhone. Someone had to contemplate working with the metals, cobalt, lithium, copper, nickel. Someone had to work with it and conceive of how to make all this work so we can communicate with each other. So that's Uranian thinking, like higher mind, connecting more to the isness of reality, but kind of filtering it through the rose-colored glasses of conditioned consciousness. And of course, the ultimate conditioning is how can I make a profit out of this? So we've come into this place where the necessity, there's a sense of I need this. This is how I survive. This is how I define my needs, my value, my worth in life. So I'm going to share my screen again and offer a perspective on these things here. So we can often learn about Uranus and any archetype by way of studying its interrelationship with the zodiac. So Uranus rules Aquarius. And if you want to understand the nature of Aquarius and Uranus, just look at its relationship to all the other archetypes. So in this case, we have Aquarius squares Taurus. So one way of understanding that is our understanding of technology. Aquarius is technology. If we remember that the true technology is the technology of creation itself, the intelligence of life as it is created, and that our minds are all extensions of the one source. And we have our ability to communicate and interact with life. Rick Levine was speaking about Bruce Lipton's work. And they realized you can measure the brain with an instrument that's external to the head. We have wave fields. We're transmitting energy all the time, which means our thoughts are affecting energy fields around our body. We're just beginning to remember these things. Now, relative to our conditioning that is very materialistic. The square between Aquarius and Taurus is the commodification of resources for the sake of technology. Anything that we objectify, meaning we impersonalize it, for better or for worse, is Aquarius, Uranus. So one example of that, coming back to the idea of our phones and our computers, very few of us are actually aware of the immense environmental and human rights devastation, in particular to low-income communities and indigenous communities, that had been created as a result of the massive lithium and cobalt mining, just so we can all have the phones that we love and care about so much. So that we can have our cars and our lithium batteries. Lithium batteries fuel our phones. Lithium batteries fuel my solar panels in my awesome van. So it's an interesting complexity, because we have innovation and we can say, oh, so many good things are being created from it, but it's still operating within this construct of commodification. And this is the same as true for the square between Aquarius and Scorpio. When we use resources for our own gain, for our own self-interest, we're suppressing the evolutionary force of creation, that everything needs to be cycling, that energy needs to move. We inhibit the flow of life and death and rebirth and regeneration. So it's a misusing of life force energy. And that Leo-Aquarius axis can also symbolize the entitlement of the human species. I can do whatever I want because I entitle myself to. I am an important human being, and I can choose to do what I want to do with that. This is a very important thing to understand, because coming back to this notion of standing outside of time, standing outside of our identification with the current reality that we're so identified with, it creates space in our minds to touch base with the essential nature of creation as it is. And then what happens when we reconnect with these archetypes, but not from the point of view of how are we destroying the world and hurting it, but what's the natural awakened expression of these energies? Aquarius and Taurus. Mind you, Uranus is right now in Taurus. How is the body and the earth naturally designed as a communication of creative intelligence? There's this old teaching, and I don't know what culture this comes from, but I intuit that this is actually an understanding that was held all over the world for a long time, many, many, many years ago, that the ancient people would keep the precious metals in the earth, because by keeping it in the earth would remain charged, and they would receive information directly from the stars, absorbed in the metals. And then when the human bodies would walk with their bare feet on the earth, they would receive this information from the earth, connecting them to the stars and charging their whole body to be conduits. This is where I feel that our potential for what it's like to be a human being is just brushing the surface of the surface of the surface, right? We're in the Dvapara Yuga. So we're learning, as Sri Yukteswar said, about the age of electricity and the different forces, but we're still thinking of it from the perspective of how can I use it? How can I take it and manipulate it? Scorpio is Kundalini. And we understand when the Kundalini is awake, when this latent energy is flowing through us and we're free of fixation, free of desire and attachment, the mind is clear to extend clear thought. Uranus is thinking. It's either projection of thought, projecting our stories, or it's using our mind as an instrument to project clear and true thoughts, right? Looking at someone, having a story about them, or looking at them and seeing them in their whole undivided, unconditioned self. At that point, it's not man, woman, body. It's essence. And there's a direct experience of it. and it's energetic. It's more about waves and energy. It's more like a flower than a thing. It's more like the blossoming of life in the present moment, unfolding unto itself, than a thing that we can possess and attach. And by the way, earlier, Rick was talking about the idea of epigenetics. Epigenetics meaning that we can work with our mind to actually change our genetics. Genetics is Pluto. Our DNA is Pluto. But the square between Aquarius and Scorpio corresponds to we can cultivate our thought, which actually has an effect of changing our essential genetic makeup. And the opposition between Uranus and Leo is awakening to the divine glory of human being, where we live in cooperation and inclusivity with one another and with all of life and other beings from other solar systems, other galaxies. There are multitudes of forms of consciousness outside of the solar system. I feel that we are yet to really uncover, in a collective sense at least. When we look at the world, we keep on seeing limitation. We're constantly seeing limitation. We're seeing limited resources. We're seeing problems. We're seeing problems with energy. And so we live in a competitive way where we're trying to figure out how can we harness more energy. But as our consciousness evolves and stands outside of the thermostat of our conditioning, we learn that we can cultivate our minds to become more energy sensitive, more attuned to the collective field, and to plug into that field. At the end of this talk, I would really like to do a little practice with all of us. And this is a joy to do. The fact that we're not physically together, in fact, kind of makes it more fun, because Uranus isn't about physicality. From the point of view of Uranus, we're working on the level of thought, on the level of energy. And so it doesn't matter whether you're physically in front of me or not. It doesn't even matter if you're in a body or not. Our capacity to communicate with one another is total. And so we'll play with that a little bit at the end of this talk. I want to present another perspective on Aquarius, looking at some other archetypes, and this will kind of launch us into looking at some charts. And I'll be shifting gears a little bit. So again, if you have questions, please do type them in the Q&A box. We have two aspects here, the semi-sextile and the inconjunct. I really feel, looking at the semi-sextile and the inconjunct, pedagogically are very practical and useful things to do when studying an archetype. The semi-sextile is 30 degrees. So Capricorn is 30 degrees before Aquarius, and Pisces is 30 degrees after Aquarius. So that's a semi-sextile relationship. And then we have the inconjunct, or the quincunx, which is 150 degrees or 210 degrees. And that in this case is Virgo and Cancer. These aspects, the semi-sextile and the inconjunct, they both in their own way have a lot to do with creating space within oneself to include elements that feel completely incompatible. They stress for growth in the way that they bring a quality of inclusion, and oftentimes will curb or refine unconscious elements within the psyche. So if in your own chart you have those aspects, it might feel irritating, it might feel difficult, it might feel clumsy, but it kind of stretches you to become more coordinated by just holding them both at the same time. So I'll give an example of this right now. When we look at the semi-sextile between Aquarius and Capricorn, it's about pushing boundaries. That's one expression of it. The idea here being, Aquarius wants to liberate from constructs, whereas Capricorn are boundaries, form, structure. And so the stress within the semi-sextile between Aquarius and Capricorn is to liberate from the constructs and the conditions that are unnecessary and irrelevant to the individuality that is blossoming, without defining oneself according to that which one is rejecting or liberating from. Because otherwise, that's not liberation. That's defining oneself according to who I am not, which is its own Capricornian construct. It's its own parameter in the mind. The semi-sextile between Aquarius and Pisces, and Maurice spoke about this earlier when he spoke about the dynamic of having Aquarius in the 12th house. The limitations of the human genius. My mind is so brilliant, I can think of anything, I can make all kinds of changes and inventions and all of these things that I think are new. And then Pisces is the ocean that washes it all away. It's the unity that folds up these thousands and millions and gazillions years of cycles and brings it into the stillness of a mustard seed and says, all of this is nothing. It never happened. None of it is real. So it humbles the mind that can become arrogant and can create a strong sense of separation and thinking itself to be important. The inconjunct between Aquarius and Virgo is this idea of improving conditions, right? That's the idea of like a technology or innovation. I'm going to invent something that makes it better, that makes life work better. And this invention is a matter of stepping outside of the way that I'm used to doing things and improving upon it with a more higher evolved way of thinking. So again, we've created the internet and all these devices of communication. So it improves upon the function of the phone. It improves upon the function of the letter, of snail mail. And these are all great in the sense that they're improvements, but then we have to come back to what's the point? What's the goal? You know, one of the issues with Virgo is sharpening a pencil for its own sake, making it work better and better and better and better. But when technology becomes a goal, an innovation becomes a goal unto itself, it becomes its own God. It becomes its own form of materialism where we become enslaved, and that notion of not enoughness. There's always going to be something to improve. Ultimately, the Aquarius Virgo inconjunct is yoga, is the yoga of the mind. It's working with oneself, postures, mudras, ways of grounding in and honing, refining, developing one's body, developing one's presence and technique in life to be a clear instrument, to vibrate with the cosmos. The inconjunct between Aquarius and Cancer corresponds to the liberation from identification. I work with Cancer as symbolizing self-identity, because in Cancer, we are forming an internal sense of self. I am at home here. This is who I am. This is how I emotionally integrate my experiences. But in Aquarius, we watch it. We separate from it. We observe it. We're not identified. Oh, here are emotions. These emotions don't define me. Now, in a patriarchal sense, that manifests as doing what we want to the world and being insensitive and disconnected to the feminine, to that which requires care. And so we have no issues collectively in the consensus with doing whatever we want for the sake of technology, even if it means hurting and destroying nature, hurting and destroying that which is sacred, ecosystems and environments that are homes to people, homes to animals. We'll say, well, you know, it's impersonal, doesn't really matter. It's all about technology. But when we take the enlightened expression of that archetype, it's the ability to liberate our minds from identifying with a self. It helps us to remove ourselves from thinking, I am my thoughts. I am Cancer, my thoughts, Aquarius. So what I'm going to do now is take a moment and ground my energy and reconnect with the prayer of this talk. So we're going to look at a couple charts here. What's really fun about this part is we're going to find that the archetype, the energy of innovation and change, that itself, one second, who are these people? AJ and Betty, no offense, I'm going to somehow remove you from being a panelist. There we go. There we go. Okay, perfect. Now I think it should work so that you can just see me. Okay. Thank you, AJ. And these are all going to represent people that in some way have had a really profound impact or influence on the world. And the changes and the innovations that they brought forth, what's significant about it is not so much what they did, but how they saw the world, how they thought. And what I'm really hoping we can take from this, especially when we begin to look at charts, and we begin to look at Uranus in our own charts or that of others, that we really begin more attention to how are we thinking? What is our projection of reality? Where do we settle for the metaphor and decide that that's it? Versus where are we really orienting to true liberation? What's more important to us? Because at a certain point, we become so convinced that our story is more important than the truth. And we can really explore that with Uranus. I'll share this one preliminary thought. We often have this association with Uranus that it corresponds to shocks and surprises. Why? We have to ask that question, right? If it's just shocks and surprises, but we don't really allow ourselves to consider what's that all about, then it's sort of like we just expect that if Uranus is coming along, we're going to be shocked. You know, if you ever followed a Uranus transit, you will say, yeah, it's shocking. Things happen in your life with the Uranus transit that feel totally non sequitur. It's like walking down a street and then a pink flying elephant comes and says, come on, let's get on a ride and let's go to New Jersey. Totally out of the ordinary. Now, the idea of a shock itself is not actually inherent to the Uranus archetype. It's Saturn that's calling it a shock. Shocks and surprises only exist relative to our conditioned consciousness. And so the whole notion of out of the blue, shock, surprises, it's only because we're seeing a story of reality. Everything's created as it is, and everything's in perfect place, exactly where it's meant to be. Your community is perfectly intact, and your belonging and everything that belongs with you is one with you. It's created together, and forever it is together. It does not separate. Creation is exactly what it is and always will be. There are no new creations. All of our ideas of creation are something coming from something, an innovation of an existing metaphor for essential consciousness. Those aren't inventions. Those aren't new. Those are just modifications and ways of working with reality in a way that the conditioned mind can apprehend. And so as we walk our evolutionary path, our own future has its own will, its own directive, our destiny, so to speak, which is as set in the present moment as the past is. It's just our identification with time that makes it seem like it's all unfolding gradually. This creates a sense of, I thought I was going one way. I thought my life was going in this direction, and then suddenly this happened. It can feel totally out of the blue. And it may take a while for the mind to be able to comprehend and appreciate, like, oh, this is one with my individuality, that these elements are totally, totally natural to who I am. And again, it's because we're learning with Uranus that the world is a friendly place, that the universe is a friendly universe. It has to be that way. It cannot be a friendly universe in some places, but not in other places. That would make no sense at all. Either there's truth, which means it's everywhere, or I don't even know what the alternative is. Truth and non-truth cannot coexist. A friendly universe where everything is included as it is, everything belongs because it's here, it's what is, cannot coexist with any notion of unfriendliness. That's also why we have a common association with Uranus as friends. Friends and groups of people. What's the idea of a friend, though? Right? A friend is someone you can be yourself around and you like being with them. And also, friend, it's free, right? It's free of attachment, right? It's like, you're my friend because you make me feel this way. Or, right, friend, it's a natural resonance. And the mind doesn't even make it so. It's like, oh, you're my friend. You'll recognize people as that, right? I feel that way all the time. I think about people and I'm like, oh, they're family. You know, I just had that feeling of seeing other people as just having always been there with me. Always. Before this body, before everything, and we'll always be together. Togetherness. But we experience the coming and the going of friendship as, you know, we're going to incarnate within form, within time and space, and form groups and circles with people, not with everyone at the same time. Like our time-space experience will mean, like, you know, you have your Facebook group of people that like to sun gaze and fast on the sun. And there's an affinity that they're going to connect with each other and do that. You have your meditation group. You have your actual family and the people that live around you. These are all little communities, and it's friendship. Friendship is the foundation of every relationship. Before lover, father, brother, son, mother, sister, etc., friendship. Friendship is a divine attribute. Friendship says we're here together. We are neighbors. And we are walking each other home, to quote Ram Dass. Friendship really says everything in creation is a part of this one community, and we're all here supporting and caring for one another. So holding this notion that this world, this universe, is a friendly place. Uh-oh. Hi, Betty. I'm gonna try to somehow get back to speaker view. I don't know how that works. I'll let Daniela figure that out. Okay, there we go. Means that the things that we don't understand, the shocks and the surprises that don't seem to make any sense to us, it's because we're touching base with an essential reality that is not necessarily understood within our conditioned understanding. And as we liberate, we begin to see the totality of what we are. And we remove ourselves from the identifications of the objects in our life as, oh, that's my mother, that's my father, that's my partner, that's my daughter. That's just the guy I'm living with. Well, in another lifetime, it could have been that brother was your lover, you know, and that sister was your wife. It could have been all kinds of things. The forms change according to evolutionary needs in each lifetime, very different, constantly changing. Form is always changing. But the essential nature of it is togetherness. And when we begin to root our awareness in that, there's a profound freedom and a quality of friendliness. Friendliness is essential to Uranus because we realize embracing the quality of friendliness means I'm appreciating and respecting that we're all here together. I'm appreciating and respecting that if we can get along, be kind to one another, then we'll all do better in the long term. Okay, so those are some preliminary thoughts. And I just really had this strong urge to dispel this sort of like face value idea that shocks and surprises is just like what happens with Uranus. It doesn't have to be that way. But it tends to, because we are all very much conditioned by time beyond what we understand. Okay, so let's go back to some charts. Got 30 minutes here. Let's see if I can do it. Oh, I got a Q&A. Let's look at the Q&A. Advancement of technologies involves that exploitation of commodities aspect. How can we still have hope to evolve technologies without exploiting others? It's such a great question. I love that question. How can we have hope to expand technologies without exploiting others? I think the question itself contains the answer, right? The fact of being aware of the commodification and the hurt that is created so that we can gain the things that we believe we need. It creates a field of different thinking. The more we give our attention to the possibility of a different way that resonates with friendliness, friendly to the animals, friendly to the earth, friendly to the people, all people, friendly to the earth, everyone, everything. That's the nature of things, and that's actually how the universe is designed. And so there's a fabric of truth that actually supports us to realize these things. I think the more we just open our mind to consider it, again, someone thought of the internet and we all went along with it because we've all agreed with commodification. We've all agreed with capitalism. It takes enough people being willing to not belong and to approach it with this mindset of genuine curiosity. Genuine curiosity. I mean, a very simple example of this, just in my own kitchen. We had a little compost bin, and the compost bin was filling up so quickly that almost every day I was walking outside to dump it in the outdoor compost bin, and it was just a lot of back and forth. And old thinking, would have been stressed out. But friendly mindedness thought, okay, how can I make this kitchen experience feel joyful? That everyone enjoys, that everyone likes, so that we all feel encouraged and excited to use the compost on our own. I don't have to walk. Basically, through collaboration and communication with my partner, she came up with the idea, let's put a bigger compost bin underneath the sink, put the smaller one in it, and then when the bigger one's filled up, maybe once a week, we can empty it outside. It's sort of a very different topic than the question, but I feel like it's the same thing. I didn't come up with the answer myself, but I was the one who was very discontent. I was discontent with the status quo of our composting situation in the kitchen. And I shared it from a place of curiosity, open to solutions, and my partner, collaboration, friendliness, touch base with a greater possibility, a greater idea that has improved all of our lives. And I think that's one of the effects of this whole time period that we're living in right now. There are possibilities and creative solutions that circumstances, the limitations have forced us to become aware of. Most of us are waiting for limitations to make us creative in our solutions. But if we are intelligent enough and gentle enough, forgiving enough, we can actually separate ourselves from the assumptions of our existing conditions and get excited about what we want to see in the world. And what we'll see in our examples is, there are really two ways of making change. We can be discontent and force things. And that's that Uranian consciousness that is so aware of everything that needs to change, everything that's wrong about the world. It breeds a psychology of alienation, of discontent, of I don't want to be here. I wish I incarnated on a different planet that has their shit together. That consciousness can't really make significant change because it's not seeing clearly. It's projecting a reality of unfriendliness. But if we work on seeing in terms of friendliness and community, then we can see, we're just making mistakes, right? We thought that I needed to take the metals. We thought that I needed to have all these technologies to communicate with one another. For me personally, this is why I'm so excited about Qigong. And it's working with energy, working with the energy systems of the body. And I'm learning a lot about myself right now and my own physical healing in correlation to my own psychological healing, but really becoming energy attuned. Because as I grow and as I evolve, I become more convinced and more clear in my understanding that our capacity for connection and intimacy is not bound or limited by context or circumstance, which means I really want to work on my mind and how I'm thinking about myself and my body if I want to be able to experience a more subtle, energetic connectivity between all beings. I'm not going to answer specific questions because that'll just take us in a completely different directions about chart signatures. Did you know that the art behind you creates Yoda ear? Love it. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so let's look at a couple charts. Okay, John Lennon. I just wanted to give this example because he has the moon in Aquarius in the third house. And so a big part of his reality was, moon is safety, security. Ultimately, he was deeply discontent with the life of being a prince, separate, higher than, separate apart from, right? There's a part of his being that really just wanted to strip away from the roles and the status. And note that that moon is ruled by Uranus and Taurus in the second house. At the core, this soul really mourned the commodification of personal resources and wealth and possessiveness that really creates immense separation between people. So it's just, meaningful to observe that about this soul, recognizing the kind of activism and the peace work that he was involved in, what he was so passionate about in his own life. But who I really want to talk about is Fred Rogers. And this is a great example of this Uranus teaching of friendliness, friendly neighborhood. Won't you be my neighbor? Well, we already are neighbors, in fact. And what Rogers knew really well was that we are already neighbors. What was his teaching to humanity? It's that we're all included. We all belong. So look at his chart. He has the sun and moon. Note it's balsamic, means the moon was moving towards the sun. Balsamic moon people oftentimes are very transcendent, right? They usually have a deep internal need to sort of give themselves to something greater, to surrender their lives. There's a sort of a letting go quality, and it's in Pisces, so that further emphasizes that. In the 11th house, Pisces in the 11th, dissolving differences, right? Dissolving separation amongst all people. 11th house is humanity, groups of people, ultimately all of creation. This reflects a divine understanding that we are all here in one community of creation, and we are all equal in that sense. And his sun was conjunct Uranus, and that Uranus is in Aries, so he was a badass. That's what that means. He was a kind, loving, inclusive badass. He was here to be a force of change. Uranus, Aries, agent of change in this world, and to head start a way of being and living together that, of course, Uranus is always going to be revolutionary only relative to Saturn. Uranus isn't revolutionary. Uranus is not shocks and surprises. Those things are only true relative to conditioned consciousness. And so we have the experience of revolutions and revolutionary behavior with Uranus because we're always going to be understanding everything in astrology according to our existing cultural thermostat. So imagine 1969. Get that? Oh. This is the famous foot bath episode. During this episode, Officer Clemens was invited to take a foot bath with Mr. Rogers. Look what was happening in 1969. Uranus was just in Libra at that time on the south node of the moon, right? Uranus in Libra. Libra is about sharing, needs getting met. Uranus is inclusivity. Uranus is groups of people. Uranus in Libra is we all deserve to be listened to. We all deserve to be given to. We all deserve to be heard and appreciated for who we are. On the south node in Virgo with Jupiter, that says a lot about racial inferiority and revolutions and evolutions that were happening at that time around race, and also cultural oppression. 1969. That's what that was about. Pluto, Jupiter, south node, Uranus. Virgo often corresponds to the psychology of inferiority and superiority. When you put Jupiter in there, you're bringing in the idea of culture and race. So let us watch this episode together. Let me make sure I have the right, before I do that, let me make sure I have the right settings on my Zoom so that I can share it and you can get, yeah, Pisces feet. Good point. Good observation. Okay, I think I'm going to do it right. I'm going to play the video and hopefully it works. So check it out.
That feels good. Oh, there's Officer Clemens. Hi, Officer Clemens. Come in.
Roger, how are you?
Fine, won't you sit down?
Oh, sure. For a moment.
It's so warm. I was just putting some water on my feet.
Oh, it sure is.
Would you like to join me?
It looks awfully enjoyable, but I don't have a towel or anything.
Oh, you share mine.
Okay, sure.
Around the country, they didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools. And Fred said, that is absolutely ridiculous.
Today, trouble under a noon sun. Negroes and white rabbis marched to a segregated hotel with these results. Manager James Brock told them to get off his private property, tossed cleaning chemicals inside the pool in an effort to get the Negroes to leave.
My being on the program was a statement for Fred.
Cool water on a hot day.
Love it. Did you see the way Fred Rogers looked at the camera at the very end? He was like, check it out on YouTube if you have to watch that clip again. His eyes were like, haha. I love it. Such a badass. Just so amazing, the soul. So, you know, that clip really demonstrated the general tendency of humanity to just be so in the dark. We were really in the dark then. We're still in the dark now. But that's also why, as we liberate our minds from conditioned assumptions of belonging according to what things have to be, we find out that there's always, as long as we're not at the apex of the golden age, which will be in several thousand years, there will always be something ahead of us beyond the conditioned ways that we are living, contrary to the principles of inclusivity and friendliness. And this is by no means about, again, leaving the internet behind because there's a Saturn reality and we have to participate within according to our karmic necessity. We all have to kind of find our relationship to the status quo in a way that works for each of us. So there's no judgment on that. But there is such immense potential for us to come about a profound new way of thinking. And every generation will have groups of people. That's Uranus. The groups of people are going to correspond to groups of people that share certain states of perception and awareness. And some groups of people will be entirely about AI and, you know, artificial technology and working more with metals and technologies. And, you know, they're going to be going more in that direction. And they're going to be groups of people that are going to be really focusing on consciousness and integrating into the Saturn dimension of reality things like telepathy, things like working on your aura, becoming energy sensitive, energy attuned, being able to communicate and relate to one another with the natural elements. So these are all things that are going to continue to grow that I'm just incredibly excited about. The episode, I'm not sure what the name of the episode was, but it's, if you type in 1969 foot bath episode, you'll find it on YouTube. So I'm going to share a couple more charts with you before we close. This final analysis is between Ramana Maharshi and Gandhi. And they're both contemporaries of each other. They both lived in India, and they're two very different people. So I'll share a little context for both of them, and then I'll just speak to this one point that I wanted to bring out. So here's a quote. Well, putting a quote over a photo of Gandhi makes it seem deep and meaningful, but it doesn't make it true. Deepak Chopra. Just put that in there for humor. All right. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history. You may never know what results come of your actions, but if you do nothing, there will be no results. Our greatest ability as humans is not to change the world, but to change ourselves. You can't change how people treat you or what they say about you. All you can do is change how you react to it. We are but mirrors of the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we can change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. This is the divine mystery supreme. A wonderful thing it is, and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do. Nobody can hurt me without my permission. One more quote, but I already read that one. Okay. The future depends on what you do today. So all those quotes basically qualify the nature of this individual's consciousness and really what he was all about, what he gave attention to. And I just want to focus on one part of his chart, Uranus. He has Uranus ruling the South Node in Aquarius in the 4th house, in Cancer in the 9th house. And one thing that he was all about was liberating society from the oppressive ways in which they took castes of people, certain cultures and divisions. His whole path was 9th house, the truth. He wanted to see reality beyond religion, beyond constructs, beyond culture, beyond divisions that people create for themselves, and follow that. And the 4th house, 10th house axis is, your nation, 10th house, North Node in the 10th house. And 4th house is who you are in that nation, your identity within it. And it's all about liberating the people to be at home together. The main point that I want to bring forth here is Gandhi held to a principle of truth, 9th house, that was friendly. His whole gnosis was seeing the world from a point of view of inclusivity and non-conflict. This is the prime example of spiritual activism. Uranus squaring Neptune and Aries in the 6th house. It's doing your work and surrendering the fruits of it. 6th house, Neptune. Serving your function, serving your role, letting go of attachment to outcome. He often said that my life is my example. My message is my life. My truth is in my actions. And so Gandhi's example is just a really good reflection for us in terms of how his soul was orienting consciousness towards a very clear perception of reality. Its story wasn't the British are oppressing us. The internal structures of government are oppressive. We got to change it. We got to fight them. We got to free ourselves from them. His internal reflection was Uranus, micro and macro cosmos. The outer world is in the inner world. If I can liberate the inner world, I will liberate the outer world. If I can work on myself and work on my own thoughts, work on my own inner oppression, where I am oppressing others in my own thoughts, then I can change the world around me. This is why I have such a deep respect and resonance with the 4 agreements, these principles that say really tend to your own integrity. Tend to how you are behaving. Concern yourself not with how others are acting. Now, let's look at Ramana Maharshi, and then we'll have to close it. The only useful purpose of the present birth is to turn within and realize the self. There is nothing else to do. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen. Try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen. Do what you may to prevent it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain silent. Your hands may do the work, but your mind can remain still. You are that which never moves. Whoa. My video just, there we go. Okay. Whew. Get back to the screen. Your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render into the world. So I'm actually not going to focus too much on this chart right now, but he actually had Uranus and Virgo in the 11th house. Just take that last quote. Your own self-realization is your greatest service you can render into the world. Ramana Maharshi was an awakened being who early in his life, I think at around age 16, went up a mountain, lived there his entire life. He was silent most of the time. His core teaching was self-inquiry. Realize the self. Concern not with the problems of the world, but become more interested with who is the one seeing them. Become concerned with the context of the questioner, not the content the questioner is looking upon. He mostly taught through silence, but when necessary, he would use words, and his words were often very simple. He would say, ask, who am I? Who am I? Who is the one asking? Who is the one looking? Now, there's a very interesting relationship. These two souls never met. They both have served many, many beings, and there are many overlaps in terms of their outlook on life. But they lived very different lives, and Gandhi was active in the world, whereas Ramana was in a cave, on a mountain doing nothing. So Rajagopalachari, who is Gandhi's attendant, once said about Ramana, what is the point in sitting in a cave in a loincloth when the country has so many problems and Gandhi is being put in jail for struggling for independence? Gandhi turned to him and put his finger to his lips to indicate that he should not criticize in this way. Ramana wanted me to comment on Gandhi. Gandhi would like to come here, but Raja Gopalachari was worried about the consequences because he knows that Gandhi is an advanced soul. He fears that he might go into samadhi, which is sort of a state of concentration on the divine oneness, and forget all about politics. That is why he gestured to the driver to drive on. Because the story goes, once Gandhi gave a talk, and the talk was really close to Ramana's ashram, but his attendant kind of just urged him to get out, to leave. He didn't want him to visit the ashram because, according to Ramana, he was afraid that if Gandhi came up there, Gandhi would have immediate realization. And I just want to end the talk with this perspective. Right? What's better? Walking the path that Gandhi walked. And of course, everyone has to walk their path. There's sort of this inevitability to it. You are where you are, and your journey and your path and your process of liberation and its expression is exactly what it's meant to be. We can't idealize something and try to make it true. So this initial statement, this inquiry, is sort of just to set us up into a reflection. What's better? The path that Gandhi walked in the world, but very much aware of the interplay between himself and the world, or the path that Ramana walked, which is knowing that the world is all within him and there's nothing to do. It's all a dream. Of course, the answer is you can't answer that, right? You can't pick sides here. In a way, they're both the same. They're both expressing the same realization at different levels of interfacing with conditioned reality. And like Ramana said, there's nothing you can do to prevent what is meant to be. And there's nothing you can do to make what was not supposed to happen. So in our own lives, we can just appreciate that maybe there are actions we're taking that we're getting riled up about, but we can be more of a Ramana. Or maybe by walking the Gandhi path, we'll have a great effect in the world. Ultimately, and this is my final statement, knowing ourself, seeking to liberate our own minds, working on how we look upon reality through the impulse of our own individuality, we will be impelled and directed and guided to show up in the world exactly the way we are meant to. What is exactly the same about Ramana and Gandhi, and why they're the two really great examples for what I'm teaching here, is there was a lack of self-consciousness in both of their paths. Gandhi didn't have the agenda to make a change. He had the agenda to change himself. And that path showed up in the world actively engaged in politics. But the core of his work was internal. Same thing with Ramana. It manifested in two different ways. And it's not for us to judge just because of one individual being more physically involved in the struggle and one person being more removed. Remember, Uranus has nothing to do with time and space. And so the more we are identified with time and space and believe that we need to live within it in order to change it, means we will also be bound by it. So because we're out of time, I don't think I'll have the chance to do this little practice with you all, but we'll be together several more times. Maybe during my Qigong on Friday, we can do this little meditation together. We'll end the Qigong with our meditation. That'll be really sweet.